Hello there, stranger. It's been quite a while. This is Brandon Olin, and welcome back to another episode of the Duskbound podcast after what has been quite the hiatus. As with all things that we really enjoy doing, sometimes work gets in the way and we've got to push pause for a bit. But fret not, because I've got plans to put out plenty more interviews in the future. Just needed to work on some other things in the meantime. But for now, here's an interview that I recorded a ways back but never got around to publishing. My guest today is Bill Desimone. Bill is considered by many to be one of the most knowledgeable experts in applied exercise biomechanics. He has an incredible ability to look at the different joints and lever systems of the body like an engineer, understanding what those systems are capable of and using that knowledge to point out how so much of what people do in an attempt to get a better workout is actually causing some serious damage to their body. In this chat, Bill and I discuss how many people often mistakenly associate bodily discomfort with an exercise being more effective, the most dangerous and damaging exercises that are still touted as top training methods, ways to make exercises more effective without increasing the injury risk, and much, much more. So enjoy this chat with author, speaker, and trainer, Bill Desimone. All right, thank you for joining me, Bill.
Thank you, Brandon.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. We had to kick the can down the road a little bit. We'd planned to do this back in early January, but as always tends to happen, the new year comes along, things get chaotic. You've got the new book release that you're working on, which is really exciting. So,
right.
So we can, and that actually kind of ties into really the first thing here. Can you give us kind of a brief bio, like what it is that you exactly do and how you got to this point? Like, how did you go from just being not that there's anything wrong with an average personal trainer, but how'd you go from being a normal personal trainer to, as at one of your talks, somebody referred to you as what they view as the sort of leading expert in the world on, human biomechanics as applies to exercise?
Well, let me correct that right off the bat, okay? Because that's nice of them to say, but I just picked up Biomechanics for Dummies out of a bookstore, and I know about 20% of what's in that book.
Oh, wow.
So I'm not even up to Dummies level, much less expert. And on the other part of the question, as far as being an average personal trainer, I think I was an average personal trainer for about 4 hours in 1983. And then something happened and I had to switch my attitude quickly. So
what was it that happened?
Well, I went to work in New York City for probably the first personal training company to do personal training commercially. So maybe others were doing it prior, but in 1983, this was like the only commercial place to do personal training.
Mm-hmm.
And I was taking over another trainer's clients, and it's like the Stevie Wonder song, big city, New York, big city. So I figured that these people had all been training, so they must be in good shape, and that if I was paying this kind of money to be trained, I would want something that I couldn't do for myself. And since I train pretty hard by myself, they must be looking for a really hard workout.
Right.
So, so I started at 6. That attitude lasted till about 10 o'clock in the morning, and I had about four clients vomiting in the locker room. And I see the supervisor walking over to me, and I just said, "Don't, got it." So I immediately, like 4 hours in, I realized, okay, I have completely misjudged what's happening here.
Mm-hmm.
So I immediately changed my attitude to everyone's a beginner. They've never seen the inside of a gym before. And I can always make the workout harder. I can always cover and say, well, that's just a warm-up set. Now we'll get to the work set. Mm-hmm. But I realized, like, once you push somebody too far, you've lost them. You can't get it back.
Right.
So right off the bat, I think a lot of trainers have the attitude that if you're training with me, you must want to train the way I train myself. And that lasted, like I said, that lasted about 4 hours, and I realized, okay, they're not coming to train like I train me. They're coming for Well, it took me a couple of years to figure out why they were coming, but I realized that wasn't why. That wasn't why.
Right, right.
And then over a couple of years, it kind of dawned on me they were coming to you more as a consultant, right?
Mm-hmm.
They wanted your experience. They didn't want to be like you because of your experience. They wanted your experience to help them,
Mm-hmm.
which is a different. You one's a consultant, one's a coach,
Right.
right? And then in the personal training context, at least, it took me about 2 years to realize it was the fact of the appointment that really, really was the hook. In 1983, anyway. So like I said, I don't know if that made me exceptional, but it definitely wasn't average because I switched from being a like trainer, just treating everybody as if it was me working out, to being a consultant and saying, okay, I have to figure out what works for this person. So anyway, so basically, though, I'm still a personal trainer.
Mm-hmm.
I mainly train clients in a studio in central New Jersey here, one-to-one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the the biomechanics aspect has come about from injuring myself about 20 years ago, and for some reason, instead of going back to what injured me in the first place, I I kind of reassessed what I was doing and realized a lot of what I had been doing in the name of exercise contradicted biomechanics. So I rebuilt what I knew and turned it into one manual, which turned into some talks, which turned into some YouTube stuff, and then turned into another manual. So that I don't really use biomechanics to describe it anymore because I use the biomechanics as the reference material.
Mm-hmm.
For lack of a better term, I refer to it as joint-friendly fitness, because that's mainly where the emphasis is in using your joints safely during exercise. And if you start there, everything else can kind of fall into place.
Absolutely, yeah. If you don't mind me asking, what was the injury that had sidelined you for a bit?
Oh well, I had
I'm just curious if it's something that a lot of people, like a common thing that a lot of people suffer from, that you have like helped people overcome since then.
well, I don't know. I mean, I ruptured. What happened was I ruptured my biceps on the right side.
Hmm.
Um, I ruptured my biceps on the right side, which meant the attachment on the scapula detached, and the bicep, that part of the bicep shrinks down,
Dude.
and then it randomly reattaches.
Randomly?
Yes, because the thinking at the time, 1998,
Mm-hmm.
was that if you reattach it to the scapula, the attachment wouldn't necessarily hold and you just rupture it again. So John Elway, the quarterback for Denver at the time, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
he had ruptured his biceps. So there was some material that was easy to get to on ruptured biceps. The difference being that he was throwing a football, 80 yards at the time, so that hurt. I was doing a curl in my basement, and I just heard a little like a popping noise,
Mm-hmm.
and I felt a slithering down the front of my shoulder, and I picked my
Huh.
sleeve up, and there was a black and blue golf ball where my biceps had been.
Huh.
So, yeah. So it didn't hurt, but it didn't work right either.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Cool.
So, um, functionally, it doesn't make a lot of difference because everything the biceps does, other muscles do, and the other elbow flexors, for instance, pick up the slack.
Mm-hmm.
So what I had to do was once it kind of healed and was out of any discomfort, You just kind of have to rebuild that back slowly. But part of what led me to the different approach was that some exercises I didn't lose any strength at all in, and other exercises I couldn't even get into position for.
Hmm.
So a concentration curl or an overhead triceps extension on the side with the ruptured bicep was very difficult. I just couldn't stabilize my upper arm. So that led me to think that, okay, there's something else here than what I was getting out of the exercise material. And then I fell rollerblading and landed on my forearm and ruptured my triceps on that side.
On the same arm?
The same arm.
Oh,
that
geez.
hurt like hell. That really hurt like hell. So the part of the triceps that also connects through the shoulder, that part ruptured. So, and again, once it got out of the discomfort part, some exercises did not lose anything. Other exercises couldn't even get into position.
Mm-hmm.
So I put all my exercise stuff aside, went to my physical therapist friends' bookshelves, and started teasing out what I could. And basically what I found was that a lot of what we had been doing in the name of exercise was really contradicted by what I found in the kinesiology and the biomechanics textbooks.
Yeah, that was really interesting. When I read, it was either in Congruent Exercise or in one of your talks, where you were basically saying that you went back to the human body's equivalent of like the instructional manual on how like a car's engine works, like really getting into the basics of how the things operate. And then when you kind of compare that to the exercise practices that a lot of people were engaging in at the time, you're like, there's a complete mismatch here. It doesn't really mesh well. So could you really dive into, what your methodology is to make a fitness regimen, joint friendly? And what do a lot of the, traditional or common practices that people engage in, like what do they miss out on that causes people to get injured so often? And obviously that's a lot of different things where that they're missing out on. So just at a surface level,
I think I think in general, exercisers assess their workout by feel. So if they feel the muscle cramping or if they feel pain, maybe not the right word, but if they feel a sensation from a certain exercise, they think that's a sign of effectiveness. Mm-hmm. Or if they feel like they're getting nauseous from a boot camp or a circuit training routine, they associate that sensation with the sign that, okay, this is good for me. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's pain, and sometimes it's just getting nauseous. So, for instance, and again, here's where the context matters. I first of all, I haven't been in mainstream fitness in quite a while. I've had my own studio for about a dozen years now. Mm-hmm. And a big part of that is so that I could practice the way I want to practice and not worry about whether what I'm doing is threatening to another trainer or the client is getting distracted by something that looks a lot more dramatic, but I know is going to hurt someone's back, for instance.
Right.
So I don't really have a current context to talk about. But the context I am talking about was 20 years back with the muscle magazines and with so-called high-intensity training. And there were a lot of techniques like using an extreme range of motion, or in bodybuilding magazines, they used to call it peaking movements, where the muscle felt like it was going to cramp, and that was presented as a good thing or a sign of how effective the exercise was. And actually, there are physiological reasons for it that have nothing to do with whether it's effective or not. It's just a sensation. Mm-hmm. So that can be very distracting if people are into it and they're going just by feel, they may be inadvertently wearing out a joint
Mm-hmm.
or inadvertently positioning themselves for an injury. Um, so let me pick at something a little more current. If you watch if you go on YouTube and find a kettlebell expert, whoever that may be,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll teach the two arm swing and they'll demonstrate it. If you notice, even the experts at the bottom of their kettlebell swing, they lose the curve in their lower back. They lose the curve in the lumbar spine. So as the kettlebell is going between their legs and then underneath them, if you look at their lumbar curve, it goes from being towards the belly to the other way. I suspect from your background in ergonomics and like workplace wellness, loading the spine in flexion is like the most basic advice in back safety type schools is don't load the spine in flexion.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what happens every time somebody swings a kettlebell and under the guise of, oh, we're doing a hip hinge, but if their lower back is curving the wrong way, that's exactly what it is. You are loading the spine in flexion, which is pretty universally considered a negative, to have a negative impact on the discs in your spine.
Mm-hmm.
Yet I can almost guarantee you every place using a kettlebell at some point they are loading the spine in flexion at the bottom of the swing. Now, is it necessarily going to cause an immediate acute stabbing injury? Maybe not, but and maybe outside of the gym, maybe they don't have a physical lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
But if you assume a normal physical lifestyle for people with bending over to pick up kids or pick up groceries or whatever work-related physical activity, and you add bending the back the wrong way in your workout, and you get competitive with it, you're just setting yourself up for that overuse injury to come a lot quicker. And now that type of instruction might be good for kettlebell performance, but again, loading the spine in flexion is not good for your back.
Yeah, that was a really interesting part about. Again, I can't recall if it was from the book or one of the talks, but how there's a lot of, I guess you could call it short-sightedness when it comes to how people approach these things, how people will, be focused. I guess the part that I'm referencing is how people have associated, and this sort of ties into a lot of everything that was just discussed, but people associate pain or injury as an inevitable side effect, like the cost of doing business when it comes to exercising and staying in shape. Like this is something that you're simply going to have to deal with. And it seems like it's very much a case based on some of the reading that I've done on this that not 100%, well, I mean, not 100% poor form. There are obviously other lifestyle factors that can come into play, but a lot of these things are essentially being caused by the thing that they think they're doing to help them. Well, I mean, the thing they are doing to improve their health, but it's an inevitable side effect when they're doing it poorly or incorrectly, as you just described with, say, the kettlebell swing. Now, because there's, obviously a million different ways that these different exercises, the different ranges of motions would naturally lead to an injury if done incorrectly in this way. Why don't we just break down one, for example? So we were talking about, people associate any sort of discomfort with the exercise being effective. And that was a really interesting insight, how there's a difference between muscular fatigue, which is what people are going for. They want to fatigue their muscles to get the benefit from that, and the strain on somebody's joint.
Right.
And that a lot of people will do a modification to an exercise to improve the difficulty of it because they think that it's going to make the muscular fatigue higher when they're actually creating a higher level of joint strain. So one
Right.
example could be, say, doing sets of push-ups, but because a normal range of motion push-up isn't difficult enough for them, maybe they'll do it while on a chair. They'll have like two chairs that they put their hands on, and they'll put their feet in another chair behind them. That way they can dip lower into the push-up to the point where like their palms are going behind their chest. Like what kind of effect does that have on their shoulder joints when they're going to that extreme of a range of motion?
So that's a good example because that's a good example of what not to do. But because it feels harder, the assumption is, oh, it must be better for me.
Mm-hmm.
So there's there's a condition called anterior instability, which means that your shoulder has a tendency to your body's having a hard time preventing your shoulder from dislocating backwards. And one of the things they suggest when you're being treated for this and afterwards is not to overstretch on a bench press or a push-up. Okay? So it stands to follow, if that's what you're going to do to avoid it in the future, maybe you shouldn't be doing that now.
Mm-hmm.
So you accurately described what happens, right? Regular floor push-ups are perceived as being too easy, and so people look to add the challenge by lowering themselves below the plane of their shoulders,
Mm-hmm.
either with push-up handles or two chairs or dip bars. But that is really just putting your shoulder in a position where you're risking the anterior instability.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, it feels harder, but it's harder because you're putting the joint in a vulnerable position. Other ways of making it harder, you can always do an additional set of push-ups. You can play with the timing of the raising and lowering. Or you can have a partner give manual resistance on your back while you're still on the floor. Or you can use any of the, like there's different elastic devices now that go from hand to hand with an elastic band over your shoulders. So you're not just lifting your body weight, you're lifting against the elastic also. So all of those techniques they'll make it more challenging and they'll be more uncomfortable, but the discomfort is from the extra muscular challenge, not from putting the joint in a bad position.
Right, yeah, you can get those like those multicolored resistance bands on Amazon for like $10 a pop, and then you can just like say put one end in each hand and then just have the rest go over your shoulders and back to sort of provide some extra resistance against that.
Yes, I mean, and that's if you even go that, and I think that some manufacturers even have specific push-up plus devices that are specifically made for push-ups, which is basically what you described, just with a brand.
Yeah.
But also, you can also just slow your reps down. I had a shoulder surgery about 1.5 years ago. So most of my pushing exercises are push-ups on the floor. And I find if I slow down so that I'm doing about 10 reps in a minute, so like I'll set my timer for 30 seconds and I want to have done 5 I don't get too obsessive over how many seconds up or how many seconds down.
Mm-hmm.
But if you slow yourself down and work in that parameter, you find like 10 push-ups that you can bang out quickly. If you do 10 push-ups over the course of a minute, maybe 15 over 1.5 minutes, your body weight gets a lot heavier.
Mm-hmm.
So there's other ways of making it challenging without putting your joint in that type of vulnerable position.
Yeah, that's something that came up in some of the discussions that I've had with Lawrence, and also just some research in that area, that if your goal is to fatigue the muscle, then doing repetitions quickly isn't always good, because you almost create a certain amount of momentum with, say, your body weight that takes the difficulty off the muscles themselves, because the body is sort of I guess not accelerating, but moving at such a rate that the momentum carries you and gives the muscles a break, essentially.
Yeah, more or less. More or less.
Mm-hmm.
There might be a place for training at a faster speed, but that's probably more, specific to a technique in
like
a
skill
sport.
training. Yeah, exactly.
In a sport or martial art, not so much for training. Well, I definitely don't think it's got a place in if your priority is taking care of your joints, which mine is.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think throwing the weights or trying to move them quickly has a place. If your priority is some sort of sport-specific performance, that's a different story.
Definitely, yeah. So I actually had a question, and this is kind of just for my own personal interest, but maybe some people listening will get some benefit from it. But first, it requires a bit of explanation. So could you just discuss a little bit what the concept of moment arm is and how it affects the difficulty of an exercise?
So a moment arm is the perpendicular distance between the line of force and the line of an axis, which is why I rarely talk about it anymore. So it's, but the best way to demonstrate a moment arm is if you had a 20-pound dumbbell in your hand,
mm-hmm.
and it's hanging straight down from your shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So like you're holding it at your side?
The dumbbell's by your side.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to compare how heavy it feels there versus holding it with a straight elbow up at shoulder height.
Mm-hmm.
So you're basically doing a side raise.
Gotcha.
So hanging straight down versus straight out to the side. Mm-hmm. Where does it feel heavier?
Obviously holding it out to the side.
Except it's not heavier, it's the same dumbbell.
Mm-hmm.
So the heaviness didn't change. What changed was the quote moment arm, the lever that it's acting through is what changed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, every exercise, especially free weight exercises, it's easier to visualize.
Mm-hmm.
Every free weight exercise has a maximum moment arm, which happens to also be the sticking point of an exercise. So where it's really important is when where that big moment arm puts you in a vulnerable position. For instance, if you were lying on a bench and doing dumbbell chest flies, most people will start with the dumbbells over their shoulders, straight up over their shoulders,
mm-hmm.
and now they'll allow the dumbbells to come out wide to the sides. Now again, where's the exercise? Where does it feel hardest?
When the
dumbbells are straight up over your shoulders.
To your sides, yeah.
Exactly. So at that point, now you've lowered into that position. If you were to have started in that position, if you grabbed dumbbells that were too heavy, you would know right away and you would put them down. You wouldn't get hurt. But in that exercise in particular, you start at the easiest part of the exercise. So if you grab the wrong dumbbells, you don't know it until you can't control them on the way down.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, in one of my various New York workplaces, there used to be an exercise featured in the muscle magazines, a pullover on a bench with a dumbbell. And we watched the guy. He took a dumbbell, he lied on a bench, he started with the dumbbell over his shoulders, and you could see from his facial expression, he said, nope, this dumbbell's too light. Puts the dumbbell back, it's a heavier dumbbell, lies back down, nope, still too light. repeats the process until finally he's lying on his back with the dumbbell over his shoulders, and he's like, okay, this dumbbell's heavy enough. And then as the dumbbell moved over his head and that moment arm got bigger, it basically tore his shoulders out.
Oh.
Massive rotator cuff injuries to both shoulders. Now, I told that story in front of Ellington Darden, who still writes a lot on Nautilus and high intensity training, and he said, "Why didn't the guy start from the floor?" And he's right. If the dumbbell's on the floor, that you feel that maximum moment arm right away, and you don't get hurt because you can't budge the weight.
Mm-hmm.
But since he started at a minimum moment arm, you couldn't tell that the weight was too heavy. Mm-hmm. So a dumbbell chest fly is like that. A barbell squat is like that. You start with the bar on your shoulders, you're standing upright. You could easily pick a weight that's too heavy when you're bent, but you could easily stand up under it. A barbell bench press is like that. There's a handful of conventional exercises that you start at the minimum moment arm, and the maximum moment arm kicks in and puts you in a very risky position.
Yeah, and that's, with, for example, the bench press, something that you mentioned in your book, that's when you hear those awful stories of the person mm-hmm. who was doing a bench by themselves, lowered it down, couldn't get it back up, and they ended up strangling themselves with the bar. That's just absolutely horrific. But that actually ties into another concept that I wanted to cover here. The fact that you can lower more weight than you can lift. And so many of these different exercises start with the lowering portion as at the, would you call it minimum moment arm when you're, say, at like the top of a bench press?
Well, a lockout. When you're locked out, mm-hmm. that would be a minimum moment arm. Again, I don't use this phrasing too much anymore unless somebody specifically asks about it, because what's important is keeping the weight off a person's face, not necessarily the technical term as to why.
Of course.
So and pretty much the so if you can just eliminate the dangerous positions by just identifying those as dangerous positions, the person training doesn't really necessarily need to know the moment arm, maximum moment arm resistance.
Sure.
It's good for people who are already into it, but it's not necessarily clarifying. Again, the point is to avoid the dangerous positions, not necessarily to turn everybody into catch everybody up on engineering.
Sure, yeah, that's totally fine. The reason that I'd asked that was because I was curious if that could be an effective way to increase the difficulty of an exercise. If, say, somebody was, regular push-ups weren't difficult enough, if instead of going all the way up to the top, couldn't restricting yourself to the range of motion where the moment arm is at the highest, which, for example, in a push-up, that'd be where your elbows are at about 90 degrees. If you only went, say, within 30 degrees in each direction of that point of maximum moment arm, is that an effective way to increase the difficulty?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Now it is, but it would be very difficult to. You would have to pick between increasing the difficulty and being able to kind of calibrate it to get a sense of progression.
Right, because it'd be difficult to keep that consistent every time
exactly.
when it's a vague,
exactly.
a vague defining boundary.
So if you're used to doing a push-up where you briefly straighten your elbows and then go into the next push-up, and then because you want to just you've had an extra burst of energy and you really wanted to, or maybe just felt stale, mm-hmm. and you decide not to lock your elbows out. And like you say, stay within that 30-degree range or so. Mm-hmm. Yes, the muscle would work harder, and it would be safe. it's just hard to tell where you picked up from next time.
Right, right.
If progression isn't, if documenting your progression isn't a thing, isn't a concern, and for some people, I perfectly understand that it wouldn't be. Then yes, that would do it. Same with squats. Same with any exercise with a lockout. If you shorten it so that you don't do the lockout, you're making the muscle work harder.
Because you're never giving it a break, essentially.
Correct. Now the thing is, some people look at their workout as performance art, and they want to do more reps or they want to use heavier weight. Locking out, since it's going to give you that little bit of a rest, will allow you to do more reps and use more weight. So the person has to really know why they're exercising. Like what's the motivation here? If you were to lock out with a bench press or lock out on push-ups, you can probably do more because you taking a little bit of a rest in between each rep. If you were to not lock out the push-ups, your performance would look worse, your numbers would look worse, but arguably your muscles worked harder. So, I mean, at a certain point, you have to kind of break down, like, wait, why am I exercising here? Like, what is it that motivates me? Is it getting that extra repetition, or is it getting that extra feeling of effort out of my workout? For me personally, at my age and the amount of time I've been working out, I'm not terribly worried about progressing numbers.
Right.
I'm more concerned with feeling the muscles work and not feeling the joints strain. And the sheer numbers I'm handling is not very relevant to me anymore.
Yeah, and for somebody who doesn't have that level of knowledge or, perspective, whatever you want to call it, having it like reaching a new high or a max number of repetitions or being able to lift a new high amount of weight, it's a powerful motivator.
It very motivating.
A strong
That's
feeling
right.
of accomplishment. So
That's right.
it's not something to entirely be overlooked, because if it keeps them going, that's better than quitting. So there's a little positive to each.
The context matters, though.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a beginner, it's very interesting. For as much well, it used to be print, but as much coverage online discussions have as to the most productive way of working out. The most productive way of working out is to go from no working out to regular working out. That's when you're most productive.
That provides the greatest benefit, yeah.
Absolutely. Once you've been working out, maybe as little as a year, but especially if you've been working out 40 years, eking out that next piece of incremental progress there's really diminishing returns to your effort.
Mm-hmm.
Again, going from zero to something regular, you get tremendous benefits from. Going from something regular for years to the next level of intensity or next level of time into your working out, you're really only going to benefit that much. And at that point, you have to decide if it's worth the extra effort.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure, for some people, for a good number of people it is, but, you go back to that question of why are you working out in the first place? And I think for the vast majority of people, they just want to be healthy. And sure, it might sound appealing to be able to bench press a dump truck, but the amount of work that goes into being able to do that is probably more than a lot of people, are really interested in putting in. Like, they just don't want to get old and decrepit quickly. So,
and it just may not be relevant
mm-hmm.
to their life. I mean, at one point I could bench press 300 pounds, but now it just holds no interest whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
So, periodically over a lifetime of exercise, you have to ask yourself, why are you doing this, and adjust accordingly. Which kind of is, it's interesting. The material I put out, whether it's video or print, even though I think it applies to basically every set of human joints and muscles, the younger you are, the less receptive you are to it, because nothing hurts yet.
Mm-hmm.
And while I think it's kind of it's a little bit, it's kind of pandering or condescending to talk about senior fitness. Like, I don't think it's a label. I don't think it's a label that really works, except in some marketing guys, some marketing guys' toolbox. The reality of it is, unless you have some wear and tear on your joints, my stuff doesn't connect. But as soon as things start to hurt, all of a sudden my stuff makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, it was interesting how you said it doesn't really connect or resonate because it doesn't hurt yet. And that's the important,
right.
Like, it doesn't hurt yet, but it will, I assume. I mean, can that be avoided with the proper approach to these things, or are those kind of aches and pains kind of an inevitable part of aging that we all have to look forward to?
Well, yes, there is that. Okay, people who don't exercise have joint problems,
Mm-hmm.
given enough years, right? And you don't know what they did outside of the gym, and you don't know what was congenital. For my, where I'm coming from though is, if you know a certain movement is contraindicated by the anatomy and the biomechanics, just because you call it exercise doesn't forgive it. It doesn't make you invulnerable because you say, okay, I'm calling this exercise.
Mm-hmm.
So me personally, that's the number one priority in my own workouts. Very specific ranges of motion, no cheating whatsoever. No. If it's a question of getting another repetition with gritted teeth and maybe substituting the wrong muscle or the wrong joint or doing one less repetition, at this point in life, I opt for the less repetition. And I can't really say it makes a whole heck of a lot of difference either.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So there's the next thing that I wanted to dive into, and if you had to guess, and obviously, you might not know for all of the people that you worked with or have worked with over time, but if you had to guess on average, like, what percentage of the people that you work with, or how often is it that the people that you work with either have desk jobs or just spend a lot of their time very sedentary without getting a lot of activity as a normal course of their day?
I think it's probably half.
Half?
Yeah, I mean, I looked at the names on my schedule. I'd say there's probably half. Half. So that also, part of the personal nature of personal training is what the person's willing to do outside of your instruction.
Mm-hmm.
So some people say, look, I'm only exercising in the minutes I'm with you. Don't give me work to do at home. I'm not doing it. And other people are regular, and they just come to me specifically for strength training and stretching.
Mm-hmm.
So for my point of view, that goes into what you're going to do with the person. I have several people who regularly go to yoga or Pilates type classes, and they come to me once or twice a week for strength training.
Mm-hmm.
And I have other people who do absolutely nothing outside of my presence. So that's just part of what you work out, as opposed to having a single way of working everyone out, and they have to fit into your system.
Right. So, for the people who spend a lot more time sedentary, are there any sort of common pain points or maybe certain, I don't know how to say, maybe like weaknesses or uh, pitfalls, you could say, that these are parts that people who live that sort of life outside of their exercise, this is a common place where they get injured if they're not careful?
Well, I mean, the back and lower back
Mm-hmm.
and the well, I guess we're talking about the total back, right? Because now what I'm sure this happened all along, where people's head was coming forward and their shoulders were
Mm.
rolling forward and their thoracic spine was moving more into flexion. It just seems that now with tablets and smartphones
And
and
this, yeah.
keyboards, that what was a what took place in someone in their 70s and 80s now is happening a lot younger.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that type of posture is seems to be very common, much more common. Now, it was always there, but it seemed to be happening later to people in life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so with that, pretty much de-emphasizing like the heavy chest pressing type exercises and re-emphasizing more of the pulling back and the retracting of the shoulders, as well as stretching. The like the doorway stretch where you make a point of stretching the pectorals out.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then lower back is well, lower backs are lower backs, right? They weren't really built to be all that durable. And rather than as interesting as it might be to try to tell them to change their workplace, sometimes it's just not really a practical thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I find that getting the person exercising in general regularly, and then a moderate amount of relatively careful ab work, like not going crazy with sit-ups or throwing medicine balls, but just sort of so-called core exercises, a moderate amount of that, and then stretching the hamstrings. Absent like an organic problem with the back, if the person is just a person who hasn't exercised, who has been sedentary, complains of occasional low back discomfort, that seems to be the approach that relieves that a bit. So again, I'm not saying it cures anything.
Sure.
If there's a bona fide injury, there's a bona fide injury. But if someone just kind of vaguely complains of periodic back pain and they happen to be sedentary at the same time, just that sort of basic intervention seems to help.
So I'm curious let's just stick with the low back pain thing, because that does seem to be a fairly, maybe not universal, but I'd say the most common symptom or problem that a lot of these people suffer from. Obviously, you help people to work out in a way that avoids this, but have you seen a very common way where people injure their lower back even worse because of certain specific exercises? Like when people they go to the gym and maybe they make the mistake of trying to lift too much because they can lower it but they can't raise it as well. Are there certain exercises that are notoriously bad for injuring people's backs pretty bad?
Well, in fairness, I don't really see it because I don't really work in
Exactly.
conventional
Yeah,
health clubs
curious
anymore.
if you know from before you had your own place or.
But yes, like for instance, um, for as much for as much as you see kettlebells, say in the general mainstream media, what I tend to get are people who have hurt themselves trying to get in shape with kettlebells. And maybe they shouldn't have been trying it in the first place, or maybe they weren't getting proper instruction. But getting back to what I said, even the experts allow the kettlebell motion to pull them into loading the spine and flexion. So you combine that with somebody who's sedentary, and it's almost a guaranteed injury. Mm-hmm. Barbell deadlift, barbell squat. You don't see it much anymore, but barbell bent over rows used to be a classic exercise. A lot of the conventional exercises put a lot of strain on the back. Mm-hmm. And again, because if a person can control it so they can manage the curves in their spine while they're doing the exercise, you have a better shot at staying injury-free than if the barbell is pulling your spine into flexion. The free weight versus machines versus functional training argument always exists in some way, shape, or form. I'm aware of it from like the 1980s with Nautilus machines versus free weights, and now of course you have, the functional training and boot camp against formal exercises in general. But in reality, for a non-athletic person, machines are a perfectly fine way to. With machines, you have fewer body parts moving, so it's easier to manage what you're working with. As opposed to like if you're in a barbell, there's too many things going on, or a kettlebell class, too many things going on for the novice to try to manage it all right away. So judging from the people who've come to me and in the course of talking, they mentioned, oh, I tried that routine and it hurt this, or, I used to do this and one day it started to hurt. Mm-hmm. And just from my own, like looking at mainstream exercise articles, the same mistakes are there that have been there for 40 years. You still see the upright row done in kettlebell classes or in the instruction pamphlet for exercise bands. And the upright row is sort of a classic shoulder impingement exercise.
So is that just to paint a picture? Is that if you're standing upright, holding the kettlebell in front of you, and you sort of pull it up like you're holding it right between your legs, and you pull it up towards your chest?
Well, yes. And if you stopped at your sternum, so if you stopped if you stopped before your upper arms were horizontal, so if you stopped to say here, mm-hmm. you're probably avoiding an impingement in the shoulder. But from the muscle magazines I saw in the 70s, through the kettlebell videos and the elastic band workouts of today, you always see somebody suggesting
pulling it up to like your chin.
Yeah, you lead with your elbows. And that's a perfect example. Yes, you feel something in your shoulders, but what you're feeling is impingements. Your humerus is pinching connective tissue, other muscles against the acromion. And it's sort of like the test the doctor gives you to see if you have shoulder impingement is to put you in the finished position of the upright row. And yet the exercise police has not sufficiently, incarcerated the upright row exercise.
Yikes. So that's interesting point we touched on there. So because a lot of people view machines as not as good as free weights because you don't get like as they say, a full range of motion. So they say you don't, allow the joints to work in a way that, I don't know how to explain it, but that doesn't, allow the tendons or whatever of the joints to be strengthened the same way that the muscles are. Is there any merit to that statement, or is that just not based in biological reality?
Well, the arguments I've heard over the last 35 years, a couple of things. They say that free weights force you to coordinate your whole body better than machines. That when you're on a machine, the machine provides a lot of the stability, and that the coordinated or the integrated motion is better than having the machine stabilize for you. But my problem with that argument is, if that's what's happening, that's correct. But if someone's using a free weight and they go into sway back, or they have unstable shoulders as they're doing an upper body exercise, or they buckle their knee, or they lose the curve in their back on a free weight,
like they're swinging a kettlebell.
Well, let's not pick on kettlebells.
Okay.
Let's pick on a barbell squat.
Okay.
So let me pick on the things that are most popular, so that people will listen to your podcast and react negatively, and in volume.
Oh,
now, but let's take something less controversial. Let's take a barbell curl.
Okay.
Okay. If you stand like in the athletic ready position, right? Slightly broke knees and tight midsection, shoulders, that you're holding your shoulders down and back, and when you curl, only your forearms are moving. Okay. Well, now your body is stabilizing itself, and that's a good habit to be in, right? If you can, you're practicing lifting or exerting force while your body is maintaining its posture, right? A good practice to have if you want to stay uninjured. And if you're on a machine and your posture is terrible while you're on the machine because the machine is stabilizing, all right, then yes, that's a bad situation, and stabilizing with the barbell is a good situation. But just using the barbell itself doesn't mean you're stabilizing. So if the person doing the curl has locked knees and sway back and their shoulders are caved forward as they're curling, well, now your body, you're not stabilizing your own posture. Now you're loading the body in vulnerable positions. And if you compare that to the person on the curl machine who is maintaining a proper posture while they're curling, okay, the tool doesn't determine what your body is doing on it. What your body is doing determines what your body is doing on it. So I use both in my practice, but I will generally start a beginner on machines because there's fewer moving parts. You know, if they don't have to worry about stabilizing their legs, they can concentrate on stabilizing their shoulder girdle while they're doing a chest press or a curl. Okay. Then they can kind of master that, and then you can move on to a more complicated one over time. There's no reason to give them the complicated one right when they start and overwhelm them with things to try to remember. Again, just touching the barbell or the kettlebell or the exercise machine doesn't give you invulnerability to all these different conditions. You actually have to handle it the right way. And that's kind of why I do personal training versus group training, because if you're doing a group, you can only be so specific with your instruction. If I'm working with one person at a time, I can see that, okay, this person's not stabilizing their shoulder girdle the right way or their spine the right way, and I can make that correction as opposed to watching 10 or 20 people at a time and just trying to herd that. Just my preference and just why I prefer to do it this way.
Well, that seems like a pretty interesting bit of insight for people there, because as you mentioned, it's oftentimes most common for people to sustain injuries when there's too much for, if they've been ignoring working out for a long time, when there's too many different things going on and they don't have the physical ability or skill set to do that with, we'll call it proper form, then the likelihood of an injury occurring is that much higher. So if somebody is just getting back into exercising after a long period away, to avoid injury, they might be better served by first going towards machines.
And actually, from what I can tell from the media today, it's not even a question of machines versus free weights anymore. That's like a 1980 argument. Now the argument is, the argument appears to be specific exercises, whether with a free weight or a machine, versus the so-called integrated movements. So specific exercises being a leg press, a squat, a curl, a chin-up, and the integrated movements being throwing a medicine ball and then sprinting after it, or the medicine ball slam, or slamming a tire with a sledgehammer, or flipping a tire.
So basically like a CrossFit class?
Well, I wasn't going to say that, but
well, I said it for you.
Well, yes, and to be more generic, they call them integrated, or maybe I'm just calling it that, but they're whole body movements, and if you do them correctly, everything is integrating. And you do get breathless from them, and maybe you get a pump and you probably get nauseous if you don't take enough rest in between attempts. Mm-hmm. Doesn't necessarily make them better. Again, we get back to people react to the sensation that the exercises causes as opposed to breaking down the anatomy and biomechanics of it. Mm-hmm. Now, me personally, I'm not a fan of the integrated movements. If I'm going to worry about integrate a movement, I would rather do a martial art or a yoga or a sport and learn the techniques involved there, because now you're integrating the movement for a purpose outside of the gym. Mm-hmm. To learn how to flip a tire. Makes her, I love the commercial where it shows the big beefy jacked guy flipping the tire with a lot of effort, and next to him is the scrawny guy rolling the tire with far less effort. And that's a great, it's funny, and it's also great, right? Like, what possible context does flipping a tire have the wrong way?
I mean, yeah, arguably if you need to move a tire, rolling it is a far more, that is kind of what wheels were designed for.
That would be functional training, wouldn't it? Learn how to roll the tire. But ultimately it's preference, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I wouldn't spend too much effort convincing somebody who likes to train that way to not train that way. Mm-hmm. I'm a lot more interested in reaching, like what you describe, the person who's laid off for too long, or the person who's never exercised. I'd rather reach that person. The person who likes CrossFit or likes a boot camp or flipping tires or slamming sledgehammers, they found something they like. Until they get hurt, they're not going to be receptive to an alternative. And that's fine. I'm glad they found something they like. I would rather let people know that what I think happens, like one of your questions here was something about common injuries when they try to get back into it after a long period of not being into it. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that's what happens. I think what happens is people who are not exercising all along, they may spot the trendiest thing. So they go to the movie and there's a commercial that turns out to be for sports wear, but it's basically an obstacle course and people going through mud and gritting teeth and all this effort. And the implication from the commercial is this is what you have to do to get in shape. When really the message is buy our shirts. But The person who's not into exercise, who hasn't been keeping up on this stuff and just thinks, boy, I really got to trim my waist, or I really got to, I'm getting stiff. I got to get some exercise. They see that, and I don't think they say, okay, I'm going to do that and I'm not going to get injured. I think they say, okay, I'm not doing that. If that's what I got to do to get in shape, I'm not doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just not aware that there's a more moderate way of going about it.
I mean, the moderate way of going about it, while effective and safe, for lack of a better word, it's not very sexy. It doesn't look great in.
It doesn't sell commercials.
It
no,
doesn't sell commercials. Yeah.
Right. It doesn't sell product. But in the fitness industry trade magazines, they frequently talk about reaching special populations. And the way they describe the special population is seniors or post-physical therapy patients or the deconditioned. In other words, the mainstream population. Like the special population are people who've been staying in shape all these years. That's the minority when you're looking at the mainstream population.
Mm-hmm.
The mainstream is dealing with age, has come out of physical therapy, has been sedentary. That's most of the people out there who are your prospective client or a prospective client for exercise. So I'm less interested in trying to talk somebody out of CrossFit or boot camp than I am in reaching the person who says, I want to get in shape, but I really do not want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I do not want to swing a kettlebell against my shin. I do not want to throw up as a result of my workout.
I do not want to train with Bill in the 80s.
I do not want to train with Bill in September 1983. That's again very dramatic, but I don't think it really works to the type of person you're talking to. I don't think it speaks to them at all.
No, I agree, and I think that that's something that I did myself. Not working out till I puke or doing CrossFit classes, but in my early 20s, after years of college and the freshman 15 plus some, all that adding up, when I was finally getting back into taking it seriously before I knew any of what I knew now, I had a pretty insane regimen. You familiar with the video workout series Insanity?
Yep.
So I would do that on one day, and then I would alternate that. On the other day, I would take classes at a boxing gym, and was very clearly pushing myself way too far because that was like 6 days of high intensity interval training a week, just loading up injuries and just all kinds of awful things right there. But I did eventually end up stopping, and one of the reasons was it's incredibly difficult to juggle, the responsibilities of, modern life, of having a job, of whatever, a family, all these other things. Then you have to go work out at a time specifically predetermined by somebody else. Mm-hmm. Whenever you put these additional conditions that you have to meet to do your exercise, those just become sticking points that end up making somebody quit when it just gets too difficult, or they've got too many other things piling up and they don't have the time for it. So if we wanted to make the workout program with the fewest sticking points, so let's say I feel like a home routine immediately avoids a lot of sticking points, because then you don't have to drive to the gym, you don't have to wait for your machine to be open, you don't have to do any of that. What do you think would be like a great beginner's level, entry level program that people could adopt, whether that's like with body weight or very simple barbells, whatever it might be?
Well, the first thing I would have most people do would be add a half-hour walk to your day.
Really? Before any strength training?
Well, given the parameters you describe, right? I mean, if you took those 6 times a week, and instead of beating up on yourself, walked for that amount of time, the time might have got onerous, right? 6 let's say you're working out an hour and a half, 6 days a week. The time is still the time, but you wouldn't have gotten banged up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And at least with walking, it's if you tried to run as your first attempt, it's easy to get an overuse injury from walking, right? So, I'm sorry, it's easier to get overuse injury from running than from walking.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still, let me give you, for instance, when I used to work in Manhattan, I would take a bus for an hour and a half, and then run to the subway, and then run to the escalator, and run to the elevator, and then reverse it, and then try to come home and try to work out.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it dawned on me, why don't I just walk everywhere in Manhattan? So for about 20 years, I'd get off the bus, I'd walk the half hour, the 45 minutes of the hour to where I had to go, and then reverse it. So at the end of the week, I basically was walking, say, 10 hours a week, okay, which I did not relate as exercise. When I stopped working in Manhattan, I stopped walking that 10 hours a week. And since since in my head it wasn't vigorous enough to count as exercise, I didn't account for it in the way I worked out.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, I ended up gaining about a pound a year, until one day I turned around and I was about 15 pounds heavier than 15 years or so ago. And granted, yes, you're 15 years older, but the other big change was I went from walking 10 hours a week to not walking, to only doing whatever I was doing in the gym, which wasn't 10 hours a week of walking.
Mm-hmm.
So I think people underestimate the value of low intensity exercise that they do regularly. Now, having said that, the next thing I would do would be
real quick before you get into that, I just wanted to say I found that really interesting that you recommend that, because that's actually something that I'm a huge proponent of as well. 10 hours a week of walking, say that's roughly an hour and a half each day. The average human walking speed is about 3 miles an hour. So that's 4 to 5 miles in a given day, which is really nothing to sneeze at.
Well, and that was just a necessity of what I had to do. You know what I mean? Like I had to get off a bus. I had to get someplace in Manhattan. I could either wait for a subway or a bus, or I could just walk. Mm-hmm. So that might not be the magic number, but even if you just took a half hour a day and did a regular walk, whether it's with a dog or a basketball in your hand or listening to a podcast, mm-hmm. If the person was doing nothing regular, adding that regular activity is going to do something positive. Mm-hmm. The next step I would add, depending on how elaborate somebody wants to get, would be a visitor to see. I have some home exercise equipment, and I find it doesn't get used because between the front door and where I have that home exercise equipment, I've got a million things to do. Now, other people might find it different. But the unit I have, on that unit, you can do a basic bench press safely, like a chest press, mm-hmm. and a pull down, and some other cable things safely. And I think if you do a chest press and some kind of pull, combined with the walking, you're a lot further ahead than doing nothing. And then, it depends how elaborate the person wants to get in their home gym. Do they want to add a chinning bar? Do they want to add a set of dumbbells, a bike, a treadmill, a stepper? That's really the person's choice. The other thing I do myself is I use yoga DVDs a lot, mainly because this way I don't have to coach myself. I can just put the DVD in and do what the nice guy tells me to do. Right. And I had to go through a lot of DVDs before I found the ones that I could not roll my eyes at, because I'm doing it for the physical. I'm doing it for the organized stretching and the mobility. I'm not really doing it for so-called spiritual, you know, I'm not worried about drawing the earth, the energy from the earth and gratitude to the sun. That's
Right.
not my thing. That's gonna be somebody else's thing. But I found that to be, the more I do that, the better my joints feel. The more regularly I am with that. So, I mean, this might be self-serving, but I would say if somebody could walk on their own, and if they could use a yoga DVD on their own or go to a yoga class, whichever works best in their lifestyle. Um, and then, then I would say go see a professional trainer for the weight training. Um, but if you were going to do something at home, if you're going to buy equipment, basic stuff. The more
So,
cumbersome, the more cumbersome a piece of equipment is to use, the less likely you're going to use it. Um, so no brand names, but there's a couple that have been around for a while that the transition between exercise is so cumbersome that people basically don't use it. Okay. I have a weight stack type machine that the pull down and the chest press and the low pulley are all already set up. So you can switch from exercise to exercise without too many contortions. These other things I'm talking about, you have to adjust the incline of the device, the cables jump the pulley, you
I
have to adjust where the pulleys are,
I think I know which device you're talking about.
or you have the the device with the power rods, and you can't simply just change the pin to change the weight. You have to have a different collection of power rods to hook it up, and switching from a bench press to a pull down to a row. The more cumbersome that is, the less likely people are to use it.
It's, as we said earlier, it's more sticking points that just become a reason not to do it.
Another
Um,
bottleneck in the way.
yeah, bottleneck. It's actually a good term for it. So you said a good way might be, obviously you can start off at walking. That might be like level one, the most basic. And if somebody wanted to apply, as you mentioned, like a chest pushing motion and a pulling motion, would something as simple as just some sets of push-ups and then one of those door frame hook-on pull-up bars, and then you've got a pull motion there with like some chin-ups, would that be just a really good basic, you know, push-ups, pull-ups, and walking?
Well, I push a push up, pull up, and then I would add a body weight squat.
Hmm.
Now the body weight squat might be the easiest of the three.
Sure.
Um, so assuming you can do push ups and pull ups, and a lot of adults can't do pull ups. Um, which is where a weight stack machine comes in handy. So if you can't do a bodyweight push-up or a bodyweight pull-up, the weight stack machine allows you to use less weight than your body weight,
Hmm.
relatively speaking. But um, but yes, if a a leg press or a squat, something which involves pushing with your legs,
Hmm.
something involves pushing with your upper body, and something that involves pulling your upper body is about as basic as you get. Um, and frankly, if more people did those three exercises, more people would be in shape. More if they did those three regularly versus nothing,
Hmm.
they would get a lot of benefit from it.
Yeah, and those door frame pull-up bars you can get on Amazon for like $20. So I don't think
Yeah.
that anybody has any excuse not to at least do that. Not to like, shame on you. You should go do this right now. But people, I think there is an issue with a lot of the advertising around fitness because they push these ridiculous things, as you said, of this mud covered, crazy
Yeah.
race through, what looks like the pits of Mordor,
Yeah.
when that's what like fitness is painted to need that level of insanity to be even remotely effective. And as we know, that's really not the case. You can start off very small and still get a great deal of benefit. As you said, going from nothing to a very basic level will get you a much larger improvement than going from, a basic level to an extreme level.
Or going from an advanced level to super advanced.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about small returns from a lot more effort. And the other thing too is the fitness industry has always been very fad driven and very trend driven, because the health club type model, you have a core of people who actually use it, and most people just pay the membership and don't use it. So to keep that core of people, you have to keep showing them the latest and greatest thing,
Mm-hmm.
which means insanity. It means P90X. It means CrossFit. It means obstacle courses, and whatever comes next. All of which, of course, leaves the people who aren't regular exercises in the dust, because now it's getting so far removed they can't relate to it at all. I'm curious to see what happens with this Planet Fitness chain, which is, it seems to be trying to address the people who aren't regular gym goers. And they may be doing it at the risk of being a little too cutesy, but they certainly have, their advertisements, the commercials on TV, they make fun of the bodybuilders as if bodybuilding gyms or their gym were people's choices today. And really the choice today is boot camps and CrossFits versus that type of gym.
Mm-hmm.
They probably wisely don't want to antagonize CrossFit since they tend to be kind of litigious. But, the Planet Fitness model, where everything is cute and there's no grunting and it's all very machine-based, I think that does speak to the deconditioned person that we're talking about. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out over time.
Interesting. Yeah, I hadn't seen any of their advertisements as of late, so it's good to see somebody taking things in a less extreme direction. All right, very cool. So we are running a bit low on time, or at least the time we'd set aside for this. So I want to be respectful of your time and get to the last bits here. So we discussed a little bit about some of the things that you see that can commonly cause injuries, kettlebells and other things. What would you say are either the single one or, top three specific exercises that, whether they're super common, fairly common, that you see people do or know that people or have heard of people engaging in, that based on your knowledge, like this does not work by any definition of biomechanics and you're just like inviting injury at this point? I remember in one of your talks you were mentioning, I believe it was a dumbbell step up where you step up onto the bench.
A barbell step
up, yes,
is an awful idea. I mean, and I say that, so it's a standard in the so-called sports conditioning literature. And, it involves putting a barbell on your back and stepping up on a bench, which is about as cursory as the instruction gets. But what happens is, let's skip ahead to the end of the set. It is vigorous exercise. Your thighs are going to be burning. You're going to be breathing heavy. Your back's going to hurt because you're supporting the bar on your spine. And now you're at the top of the bench with your knees locked. And getting to what we talked about earlier, your knees are locked, so you're at a minimum moment arm.
Mm-hmm.
And now to get off the bench, you're going to bend your knees, which introduces a new moment arm. And you're already fatigued. And you generally don't step forward off the bench. right? Because that would be crazy because the weight's going to collapse on
Yeah,
you.
I'm trying to
You
imagine
step
that. That sounds awful.
you step backwards off the bench where you can't see. Okay, and so now you step backwards off the bench, and if you don't twist your ankle or step on something, and you get off the bench successfully with the bar on your back, you have to get the bar to where the rack is. And should you have to turn with the bar, well, now the bar is going to take on some torque around your spine. Um, it's not only a theoretical disaster, but at least two college athletes got seriously injured doing that exercise. Um, and I think the idea comes from the old classic running stadium steps. Um, and it's just a barbell version of that. The only difference is stadium steps are a lot less steep than most benches people step on, and you don't do it with a bar on your spine. So if there is a particular benefit that somebody thinks that stepping up motion has, I would use a weight vest or use dumbbells. I definitely wouldn't put a bar on the person's back, and you can't use too steep of a bench because you can't help but bend over as you try to get on it, as opposed to stadium steps, which are maybe 6 inches high, and you can get your foot on that bench without bending over too far. Now, I don't think the sedentary person is inclined. It's almost self-policing. The sedentary person isn't going to go to a barbell step-up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the athlete might, but like I said, it's not just theoretically a bad exercise. It actually is implicated in major injuries. The other thing you mentioned about the kettlebell. It's not necessarily the kettlebell. The user has to decide how likely they are to use it safely. I think it's very easy for the kettlebell to pull a person into a vulnerable position. And if your sport is kettlebells, if you want to get good at moving kettlebells, you just have to accept that risk, just like you accept the risk when you go on a football field or a track or a hockey rink. If you're doing the exercise for the sake of, quote, getting in shape, you have to really weigh whether you think you can handle the possible twisting with the kettlebell and the swinging overhead and the swinging between your legs without causing its own injury. So it's not the tool, it's what people do with it. You just have to decide how likely you are to use it safely. And then the other thing I like to frequently pick, we mentioned before the upright row, which just that exercise simply will not die. It was with barbells in the muscle magazines in the 70s, and then it was on cables, and then it was put on machines and elastic bands and with kettlebells. And it makes a dramatic picture for the magazines, but the finished position is such a clearly a strain on the shoulder that when I'm exercise police commissioner, that will be banned.
All trainers who recommend that will have their licenses revoked, and they'll be put in the stockades in the center of town.
Instantly. Well, public floggings. Public floggings with elastic bands.
Some of those resistance bands that everybody else is using.
Put them to good use.
Yeah. So if somebody did want to engage in that, you said if you stop at the sternum, which would be like just dead center, kind of like right below, I guess, where the nipples are, would be a good place to stop?
Yes. Now you could also use, and that's if somebody saw a unique value to the upright rowing motion. I personally don't. Okay, I mean, you could use a side raise and avoid the impingements in the shoulder. You could use a side raise machine and avoid the impingements of the shoulder.
Which, just to clarify, is that when you've got, say, a dumbbell in each hand, did you just lift your arms up till they're parallel with the ground?
Right, but not necessarily parallel to the ground. I mean, maybe a little bit short of the ground, or maybe slightly in a maybe not in exactly in the plane of your shoulders, maybe slightly to the front.
Mm-hmm.
There are ways of doing that that can avoid the impingements that with an upright row, since the weight's being borne in your hands, you have a little less wiggle room to avoid. The only way you can avoid the position with the upright row exercise is by not going up quite as high.
Mm-hmm.
The dumbbells give you another little more freedom to work around those the internal obstacles.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that's if you see a mandatory reason to do an upright row. I'm not so sure there is one. But in the newer book I'm working on, rather than be the exercise police commissioner and ban exercises, what I did was I ranked exercises 1 to 5. So five being very manageable to do safely, and 1 being very challenging to do safely, or like so challenging as to be unlikely that you're going to do it safely. So in that context, a barbell step up would be a 1.
Mm-hmm.
A barbell squat would be a 3, because you can take steps to make it safer. You can manage the risk of a barbell squat.
Mm-hmm.
And a leg press, a specific leg press machine, would be a 5, because once you set it up properly, it's very difficult to do it dangerously.
Right.
And the reason why I went to that 5-star, and I did that for 75 exercises covering the whole body. And the reason why I went to that is I think it's more useful to people as a quick look to how much attention they have to pay. So theoretically, somebody would be considering doing, I see this exercise in a magazine, or I see this exercise online. They would look it up and see that I rate it 2 out of 5 stars or 4 out of 5 stars. And then they'll know, okay, maybe I should pay attention to what the joint concerns are. Again, the 1 and 2-star exercises, there's some joint concerns to pay attention to. Not the same as saying don't do it. What I'm saying is if you're going to do it, know this is what you have to manage.
Yeah, like if you're going to do, say, a 3, 2, or 1, then maybe you want to be a bit more cautious in how much weight you apply on that exercise. Whereas if you're doing a 5, you can pretty safely push yourself to your physical limit.
Right. Or if you're going to do, like I won't do what I rate as a 1 exercise, right? But I'll go down to a 2 or a 3.
Mm-hmm.
But I know if I'm going to do those exercises, I've got to have the time to set the machine up or the free weights up properly. I have to make sure that I'm warmed up to do that specific exercise. I have to make sure I'm not going to have any distractions when I'm doing that exercise. If I'm sticking with 4 and 5 exercises, I know I can set the machines up and just go,
mm-hmm.
because it's very easy to do safely. So mainly conventional barbell exercises are a 3. Pretty cut and dry how you can do them safely. If you don't take those steps, they're a little bit riskier. But people who are into exercise don't like being told what they're doing isn't the best thing since sliced bread. So the challenge becomes how you communicate. How you can reach that person without turning them off.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, I rated the exercises 1 to 5, and then I laid out the exercises so that you have 4 pictures of the exercise. One being an extreme start, which I would, with warnings as to why you wouldn't do this. For instance, the push-up between chairs
mm-hmm.
would be an extreme start, and then you would have a regular push-up start would be an optimal start, and then finishing the push-up before your elbows buckle being an optimal finish, and then the finished position of a push-up with the elbows locked and your head bowed and your spine sagging being an extreme finish, with bullet points underneath, like, why to avoid this position, why to include this, and then a little write-up as to the instruction of how to do it. I just think that's more useful to people than telling them, don't do this, do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so much of, health and wellness in general, people try to paint as very black and white. Eat this thing, this is healthy. Eat this, or don't eat this thing, that's going to kill you. But in both, exercise and diet, it's a lot more gray. Things aren't like, it's not cut and dry. It's a lot of middle ground, more of like a sliding scale that everything kind of exists on. And I think that the way you're describing it is a good way to go about doing it, with, say, the 1 to 5 scale, or the ideal way of applying this thing versus the extremely bad way of applying it, because it gives people a better idea of where they exist on that, instead of just thinking, I'm doing this great or I'm doing this horribly wrong.
Well, there's an interesting observation in there about the internet economy, or the internet marketplace, which is the ones who speak the boldest and speak in the terms of the most extreme try to get all the attention. But reality is shades of gray,
mm-hmm.
which isn't sexy, and you may not get the page views or the clicks.
But you're accurate.
But that is what's useful to people, or that is what's real. Which is why, like, I don't have a huge internet presence compared to other fitness experts, because I don't want to pick fights with others or put things out in absolute terms just to get a click, because I think it misrepresents what you're doing, or it misrepresents what's happening. So to say things like integrated movements are better than exercises, and free weights are better than machines, a lot of that's just to be provocative, to get the attention.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't really elaborate on the issue or clarify anything. For good or bad, I'd rather put out the substantive piece of work and figure out how to draw attention to it later, rather than get the attention and not know what to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
it's a very responsible approach. I think if more people took that approach, then more people would be adhering to the health plans that they set out for themselves, instead of trying to jump onto the latest, greatest, crazy thing.
The next bandwagon, right?
And then no wonder it's not sustainable, because it's like they came in as like a college freshman and somebody dropped them into a 400 level course. Like, are you wondering why they flunked out? You shouldn't be, because that's completely insane.
Yeah.
So excellent. So the new book that you are working on, Joint Friendly Fitness, you said that you're hoping to have released at some point by the end of summer, was it?
Yeah, I'm hoping to. I have what I'm really working on now is somewhat of the format. Probably I would put it out as one complete volume, rather than a subscription model, or a series of courses.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where I think I would rather put it out as a book, because that's what I can relate to it.
Mm-hmm.
Put it out as a book, and then I would, and then after that, the work would be, doing a sort of like maybe doing a video clip of an exercise, so that whoever bought the book, the video clip can add to their understanding, and maybe the video clip itself promotes the book to somebody who hasn't read the book, as opposed to doing some kind of subscription model where you put out 5 exercises a month or a quarter or whatever, and it changes the work you're doing, right? You're managing the process as opposed to putting out content people can use.
Right.
So I think I'm leaning towards putting it out as a single book and then concentrating on making it usable for people, as opposed to concentrating on the mechanics of putting out what's in effect a subscription model or a membership model.
Yeah, I mean, that's not a simple thing to put into place.
Yeah, and as a consumer, I never bite on that. It doesn't work. I understand why the seller of the product prefers a subscription type model, but I'd never bite as a consumer. And maybe the younger generations than me do bite on it, but I know it doesn't work for me.
Right.
Or for a while I was getting suggestions, you should create an app. Until I talked to people who design apps who said, don't do an app. They said, don't do an app. And then when I thought about it, I realized, you know what? I use very few apps in this way. Me personally, I'm much more inclined to watch a video or read a book or research a video or a book than I am to get dribbled out little bits of information on somebody else's schedule.
Yeah, I'm the same way myself.
Okay, and we're of different generations, so maybe it's not that far-fetched.
Yeah, I mean, like I said before the interview, I consume books like a madman, so that just kind of lines up with how I already was going about doing things. But yeah, so whether it comes out as a book or in this other format, but most likely book, you're aiming for late summer, and if people are interested in diving more into this more immediately, your, I believe, second book, Congruent Exercise, is that available up on Amazon right now?
That's on Amazon in print and Kindle. And there's a Congruent Exercise Facebook page that has a few years worth of excerpts and video clips and other ramblings. All pertaining to lifting weights safely. So, and like other Facebook pages, not particularly organized. It was sort of like whatever I thought was interesting to put out at the time, I would put out there. So that, aside from the books themselves, that's the best place to go to see excerpts of the books or links to the videos or again, like I said, just other random topics pertaining to biomechanics and safer exercise.
Great. And if people happen to be in the New Jersey area and are looking to work with you, directly, what area are you located in, and what's, like, say, the domain, the website for your place?
It's optimalexercisenj.com. And I'm in central New Jersey. You don't get much more central. If you threw a dart and hit right in the middle of New Jersey, that's where I am. So I'm between Rutgers and Princeton to give to exit 8A off the Turnpike. So.
All right, great. It has been great chatting with you, Bill. I appreciate you coming on, and maybe once the new book is out, we can share that out to people so they can get a look at it firsthand.
Very good. I'll be sure to stay in touch.
Great. All right, great chatting with you, Bill. Have a good one.
Take care.
Thanks for tuning in. To check out any book recommendations, tips, and other resources mentioned, go to our website deskbound.co/episode 21 to see the full show notes. And while you're there, click the free course button at the top to learn how sedentary life damages your health and what you can do about it.